This is the Hasselblad 907X with the CFE 100C back. And on it is the 55mm f2.5 V lens. This thing is amazing, and if I was going to buy one lens for this system, it would probably be this one. The camera is mine, the lens belongs to Hasselblad. I have to send it back at some point. I keep delaying as much as I can to keep this lens around for as long as I can, but wanted to make a video specifically talking about it because I find both the focal length and even things like its autofocus performance, the new build quality, all that stuff to be really, really interesting and frankly, pretty surprising in how well it performs. And as Hasselblad is, expensive and obviously not as many people are going to have things like this. I have seen very few videos on both this system and especially these lenses, the new V series, of which they have the 38V, the 55V, and now the 90V. And so definitely wanted to make a video about this, about my experience with it, and especially the image quality and what you're actually getting out of something like this. So obviously you see two Hasselblad cameras here. One is the 500cm with the 80mm f2.8, and then we have the 55mm f2.5 on the 907X. This obviously is a large 6x6 medium format square camera. This has kind of like the APS-C version, I guess, of like a medium format sensor at 44 by 33. So even though this is an 80mm and this is a 55mm, they're actually fairly similar in their field of view. Now, first of all, this lens is really beautiful and works really well with this system. You get a really simple lens hood here. It's not like a pedal shaped hood. It doesn't have a square hood design or anything. Just very simple. It's metal, looks great on the system. And then with the lens itself, you have some really classic looking things here. So you have the old school depth of field calculator basically here. So, and as you can see here actually too, I'm kind of like jumping the gun, but you can engage manual focus by simply pushing up the manual focus dial here. And then you get a really, really nice manual focus experience. If I'm going to be critical, I wish it was a little bit more firm. It's not bad, but I do like to have a little bit more resistance, I guess, to this. But I really love the kind of just easy push-pull aspect of being an autofocus. And if I want to critically focus or just manually focus this thing, really easy little push there. And then you have this secondary ring, which is clicked, but it's not engaged in a, there's no stops to it. So I have this controlling my aperture, and just like any aperture ring, it's clicked. But again, if you hit something like f32, which is what this goes to, or f2.5, it's just going to keep clicking. But you can hear that it does have a good sound to it, and you're getting those clicks to work in conjunction with the aperture. So obviously that's going to work really well. And fun little thing that's not like an Easter egg or anything, but the actual focus ring here, where you have the grip of it, these are actually just little Hasselblad logos. So a fun little thing there. And then another kind of like homage to their V series. So on my film camera here, we have this little V logo, which I'll show here. And then on the side of this lens, we have this other V logo as well. So kind of a cool little homage on the side of the lens here that kind of obviously harkens back to their older legacy cameras, if you will. Now, something else that's pretty interesting about this lens, for me at least, is just the size. It is very small, very lightweight, and especially for a small little camera like this, it is just very easy to take around. And to be honest, the way I have my camera set up, sometimes it might even be too small. So it actually works great like this, but sometimes it's just so small that it'll end up kind of like doing this. So I definitely have never complained about a lens being too small on this channel before, but if you kind of check it out like this, the way I have my camera strap set up, it couldn't balance better, even on a camera that is just so small like this. So definitely one of the things that on any of the Hasselblad cameras like the X2D or this 907X. It just pairs so well with this system. Now, one of the things that's going to be unique about each of these lenses is how the autofocus works, as well as how the leaf shutter sounds. So I'll fire up the camera and we can see if we can hear the leaf shutter on here, because the original series of XCD lenses, the generation prior to these V series, they all had some sounds to them. I'll say that to say the least. And if you watch any of my videos on the X1D2, I definitely shared the sounds that I was getting out of those leaf shutters, and some of them weren't my favorite. So I'll play the sound at least out of this one. You can hear what the leaf shutter sounds like. So it's very quiet, and obviously this is a dynamic microphone, and so it's a little bit different than something like a shotgun or a cardioid microphone or something, but we will try to show the sound of this thing while it both focuses and takes a photo. It honestly is incredibly quiet and kind of sounds like a fax machine, but this is really the first time I've actually really listened to it focus, because I normally don't really even hear it when I'm using it in practice. And I want to take a quick second to say that I am not one to celebrate milestones of anything, really, but I just hit 60,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and I do check the analytics every once in a while, and it tells me that the vast majority of you that watch my videos aren't actually subscribed. So I'm not going to tell you to buy anything in this video. You can obviously support the channel by doing a myriad of things, but the easiest way would just be to hit the subscribe button. It costs you nothing and definitely helps me out. Also, that subscribe thing is right next to the like button. So if you have earned a like here, that would be super helpful. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention, and obviously you can tell this video isn't sponsored by Hasselblad because I'm going to be bringing up another camera manufacturer. I did a video on the Fujifilm 55 f1.7 on the GFX 102. And one of the things that I did that's going to sound very weird coming from me here in terms of how I'm rating this lens is that lens did really well in autofocus, but it wasn't great in autofocus. And so one of the things I was criticizing it for was its autofocus performance. Now, I've not done both of these side to side, so I couldn't tell you exactly like how they perform differently. One of the things here on the Hasselblad, while it does have face tracking autofocus, it's not tracking autofocus, so you can't just hold down like or half press the shutter and it will continuously focus. There's no continuous focus in this camera. It is all single focus, and it works really, really well and will track a face through the screen. And then when you want to take a photo, then it will focus. And I was very impressed with how well the autofocus worked, but it's probably not as good as the Fujifilm stuff. And again, I criticized it for things that it didn't do perfectly when it has those functions that this camera doesn't have and this lens doesn't have, at least in its current firmware and iteration. So I'm kind of going to be talking glowingly about this when the other lens, I was critical on it, even though it has features that this one doesn't have. But I was expecting more out of the Fujifilm lens because they had talked so much about the autofocus performance in that camera. And in terms of the marketing of this, I haven't seen the same thing. So I'm trying to be fair and objective in how I'm talking about both these things. The things that I criticize that Fujifilm lens for, again, this doesn't even have. So take that for what you will. But I have found this to be great at just getting focus, but I wouldn't use this that much in a like fast moving environment. If I wanted to do more fast moving things, I would feel more comfortable using the Fujifilm system than I would this. But again, that's also something where if I'm doing a lot of fast moving stuff, I'm most likely going to be doing something like either manually focusing on a Leica or just using another system like Sony that has just incredible autofocus. And I'm reserving something like this more for portrait work, for details, for things that I would normally use this camera for. And so if I'm thinking of the use cases for this, I'm significantly faster using this camera and this system, and I trust the autofocus more than I trust my manually focusing skills on this, even though I've used this camera for, I think, almost 15 years now. But that's at least where I'm coming from when I'm talking about the autofocus performance and my expectations for it. Now, all that being said, with autofocus, one of the things that I did criticize the Fujifilm lens for was its performance in manual focus, and that is not the case here. This thing is a joy to use in manual focus. Again, I wish that this had a little bit more resistance to it, but that is just being nitpicky, and that is probably like a personal preference type of thing. I really have enjoyed using this in manual focus. There's a few different tools that you can use, and usually I just use the slight bit of focus peaking, and then I'll double tap on the screen where I want to be and kind of just fine tune the focus if need be. I basically use it very similar to how I use my 500 CM. And so in terms of using it in a focus mode, I find that this experience of using this in a manual focus setting is very similar to how I use this camera. So in those terms, it's one of the things that I find is really, really good about this lens, and something that also helps me kind of like harken back to using my beloved film camera. Now, all of those things to say, size, weight, autofocus performance, none of that matters unless you're getting a good result out of this thing. So let's check out some images, and I'll give you, I guess, my final thoughts on how well this lens performs in practice. So as you can see here, the lens performance on this thing, even wide open at 2.5, is absolutely absurd. It is so sharp. When I first pulled up the images, I was legitimately blown away with how much detail this thing resolved, even at 2.5, because my first images when I was working between the two things, I wanted to make it as close as possible. So I shot all of the stuff on film at 2.8 and on this lens at 2.8. Then I shot everything wide open on this lens at 2.5. And the detail out of this thing is like just absolutely mind-blowing. I also found the bokeh to be really nice. It wasn't too swirly cat's eye. It definitely has some character to it, which is nice. And I found the flares on this thing to be really good as well. I shot a full couple session up in the mountains with this and really, really liked the images I got out of it. Again, I found the autofocus to be really reliable. I found just this lens to be really good. So it's one of those things where, yes, it is expensive. There's no doubt about that. But if I'm going to own one lens for this system, because of its focal length being in that kind of like 42 millimeter range, but also being medium format, so you get a little bit more subject separation and things than you normally would get at 2.5. I find this to be as close as I can get on a digital camera to something like this. And I find the focal length to be super versatile. And honestly, again, if I was going to buy one lens for this system, it would definitely be this one. So thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. And then if you want to check out more of my videos about the 907X, you can do it up in this playlist here. See more of my videos just specifically on this camera up here, and I will see you in one of those.